What is going on, you beautiful people? Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so we have been sitting here, twiddling our thumbs for about 2 weeks now, waiting for this update. But finally, we have the new V3 kit changes for both Sparxie and Guang. I know a lot of you have been refreshing your feeds, desperate to know if your future mains got buffed to the moon or nerfed into the ground, especially if you're planning to pull for them. And let me tell you, you have clicked on the right video. Today, we are going to do a deep dive into every single adjustment made in the V3 update. We're talking Sparxie, we're talking Guang, and we're even going to look at the adjustments made to Sparkle's already buffed kit. Buy the 6,480 Oneiric Shards limited pack for just $70 at lootbar.gg. Returning users can also grab an extra coupon for up to 5% off, link in the description. Now, I do have to deliver a little bit of bad news right off the bat for the Black Swan mains out there. I didn't include her in this deep dive because, unfortunately, she was kind of left out of the group project this time around. The only changes she really received were to her Eidolon 6. So, if you were hoping for some massive base kit overhauls for Black Swan, I am sorry to say you're going to have to wait another week to see if the devs show her some love. But for this video, our laser focus is on the other three, because they received some very notable buffs. I'm not going to bore you with a 10-minute intro explaining the basics that you've heard a million times. Let's just jump straight into the data. All right, let's kick things off with Sparkle. We're starting here because she received the fewest number of changes to her Nova Flare and her buffed kit. First up, let's look at her talent stacks. The developers decided to reduce the maximum amount of talent stacks she can hold from 4 back down to 3. Now, whenever you see a number go down, it usually screams nerf, right? To adjust for this, they did buff the amount of vulnerability provided by each stack to match the new max count. However, if you crunch the numbers, it does result in a slightly lower amount of total vulnerability compared to what we had before V3. So, is this a nerf? Technically, yes. It is a tiny nerf. But is it noticeable? Honestly, not really. It's not going to ruin her gameplay. In fact, it's arguably balanced out by the fact that hitting max stacks is now much easier since you only need 3 instead of 4. The second change for Sparkle is actually really interesting mechanically. Previously, her ultimate was the only thing in the game that could overcap your skill points. Well, they changed that. Now, literally everyone on the team can trigger this overcap mechanic. When you first read that, you might think, whoa, that changes everything. But in reality, it's more of a cool, niche mechanic. It really only comes into play effectively if you are running her with Sparxie and sometimes Archer. Overall, not too much changed in terms of her kit. She is still extremely overpowered. I am genuinely hoping that this version of her kit makes it to the live servers because, as it stands, Sparkle is easily one of the best supports in the entire game. Now, let's move from one overpowered support to another. Let's talk about Guang. Unlike Sparkle, who just got some tweaks, Guang received a lot of changes, and these are significantly more impactful. First, let's look at her skill. They buffed this quite a bit. Previously, her skill gave 15% of her own elation stat to the team. In V3, that has been bumped up to 20%. I know. Going from 15% to 20% sounds like a tiny incremental change. But you have to remember the context. Elation is a very rare stat right now. It's basically only available to elation characters. So, that buff is very meaningful and has a really big effect. Plus, remember that Guang's own elation is increased by this buff to her skill, which means her personal damage is going to be way higher. But wait, there's more. They didn't stop at just buffing the stat share. They also cranked up the damage amplification on her elation skill debuff. Before the buffs, enemies took 10% more damage. After the V3 update, that number has jumped to 16%. That is a nice increase. And they still weren't done with her skill. On top of the buff sharing and the damage vulnerability, they also increased the direct damage multiplier. Her skill now deals damage equal to 100% of her elation stat, up from the previous 80%. However, I do have to mention one specific nerf regarding her synergy. If you were planning to run Guang with Archer, you might want to rethink that. They changed her talent so that her additional damage only applies once, rather than being based on the number of skill points consumed. This is a pretty significant hit to her synergy with Archer. Essentially, this change solidifies Cypher as the better support for Archer once again. Now, Let's talk Eidolons, because this is where things get crazy. Yao Guang's Eidolons were buffed across the board, but the star of the show is undoubtedly her E1. This Eidolon went from being pretty mid to legitimately one of the best Eidolons in the entire game. The new E1 grants 20% defense ignore to all elation damage dealt by the team. Defense ignore is one of the most valuable stats you can get. This is incredible for Sparxie. It's incredible for Yao Guang's own damage, and it future-proofs her for any future elation characters. On top of that, her E1 also increases the fixed amount of punchlines taken into account whenever she uses her ultimate. The simple translation is, her E1 makes the elation skills from both herself and Sparxie do quite a lot more damage than before. Finally, for Yao Guang, we have to talk about her light cone. They tweaked it so that it now gives 15 energy after every wave. This functions very similarly to Ruin Mei's light cone. Do not underestimate this change. I know it sounds small on paper, but for Yao Guang, it is surprisingly one of the biggest buffs in this entire update. Yao Guang suffers from a lot of energy issues. She is one of those characters where you often find yourself missing her ultimate by just a few energy. This light cone change is specifically designed to fix that. Okay, moving on to the main event, let's talk about Sparxie. I saved her for last because she received the most changes. Let's start with her enhanced basic attack and skill. The developers did a bit of a remix here. They lowered the regular damage of her skill by quite a huge amount. That sounds bad, right? But, to compensate, they increased the elation damage she deals to enemies. If you look at it purely from a raw damage perspective, it looks like a big nerf. However, personally, I would say they made up for it with the rest of the changes. One of the best changes she got is a pure quality of life buff. They removed the maximum cap for her firework stacks. This means she can now hold as many of her fake skill points as you want. This is actually huge. When I was testing her previously, I kept running into these scenarios where I wanted to save up her fake skill points for a big attack, but I couldn't because I would hit the max cap. Now, you don't have to worry about that. Next up, they buffed her team-wide utility. The crit damage buff she provides to the team was increased from 40% all the way up to 60%. That is a straight-up jump in stats. They also adjusted her bonus effect specifically for elation teams. Now, when you use your ultimate with 3 elation units on the team, you instantly gain 4 of her fake skill points. This change rewards you for running her with 2 other elation characters, helping her get even stronger when she receives her last teammate. And for those of you worrying about artifact grinding, I have good news. Sparxie is much easier to build after these new changes. Previously, you needed to hit 4,000 attack to max out her trace for boosting elation damage. In V3, they lowered that requirement to 3,600 attack. To top it all off, her light cone also got a buff. It now grants 48% crit damage, up from the previous 36%, which is a sizable buff. So, let's try to summarize this Sparxie situation. If you look at every single change in a vacuum, you could argue that Sparxie was slightly nerfed. However, technically you can say she got buffed in her premium team because Sparkle and Yao Guang received individual buffs. It's rare that I get this confused by patch notes. Usually it's easy to say buff or nerf, but they adjusted Sparxie so much that I was confused for a while. After doing some minor calculations, my conclusion is this. She is a lot easier to build and play now due to the quality of life changes and lower stat requirements. So, I think this is a good thing overall. And there you have it, folks. That is a complete breakdown of all the V3 kit changes for patch 4.0. I want to hear from you guys now. How are you feeling about these changes? Do you think the Yao Guang buffs are enough? Let me know down in the comment section below and tell me if you are planning to pull for them or not. Also, I don't say this often because I know it gets annoying, but if you found this breakdown helpful, please do consider subscribing. I love you all, and I will see you in the next one. Buy the 6,480 Oneiric Shards limited pack for just $70 at lootbar.gg. Returning users can also grab an extra coupon for up to 5% off, link in the description.